Hi friends, welcome to the Share Report. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. And for all of you faithful and loyal subscribers, thank you so much for being here. Be sure to share this channel with others. For others, become active citizens, get involved, educate ourselves, know our history, because it is imperative for our future, the sake of the country, our finances, everything. We are here to learn and do what's right. I'd like for us to all be active and just know history and know what we're up against. So I wanted to talk about the 2024 ballot again. There is a race here in Florida for the Senate seat. I'm pretty sure there may be in other states, but I'm mostly focusing on Florida. There are so many people here now, more in the last 3 years, and consistently coming here. So I wanted to educate as many people as I can, and remind those people who came here from other states, if you came here because of politics, you're running away from something and running to freedom, running to a better life, running to better fiscal, financial things, just remember why you came to Florida. No matter what it may be, maybe it may be social issues or fiscal issues, like I said, or just a better life, or you're retiring or you like the weather. Just remember, us natives, we want to keep things wonderful here as much as possible. So if you're new to Florida, pay attention to this video and share it with others. So, like I said, there is a Senate race. Rick Scott, he is on it with two other gentlemen. I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to briefly go through Rick Scott. He was the governor a while back prior to being in the Senate. This is his first term in the Senate. He was the governor before. I will say he did a better job at being the governor than he is in the Senate. I wouldn't say he was perfect. I would say the last term of being the governor, he really was very weak, especially during the time of COVID. His last term, I did some phone banking for him, giving people a call, vote for Rick Scott for governor, I was much younger at the time, naive in some ways, just getting into learning about politics, wanting to be very active and learning things. I got to meet up with him and we talked, and he said, reach out whenever. You know how politicians are, they say anything and everything. But me, I took him at his offer, and whenever the time came for me to reach out, I did. And it was during the time of COVID, because I didn't like the way things were going here in Florida, especially with the mask situation and the forcing of the vaccine. I should not use that word, the poison dart, sorry, that they were trying to force on people. I wanted to keep that far away here in the state of Florida, keep freedom alive, all the things. So towards the last part, he was very, very wishy-washy, sent a very wishy-washy letter back. And of course, he came from the pharmaceutical industry, so there you go. So we're not going to talk about his time as governor. We're going to talk about his time in the Senate. I will say he is much, much, much more weak in the Senate. He says he's conservative. He puts forth these bills. Nothing comes to fruition. He doesn't do anything. He actually signed to give Ukraine more money. So he's really not for Americans like he says he is. He may think he is, and push that out to people, but he's really becoming a swamp creature. So, I mean, if he gets elected again, it's very hard for incumbents to be beat in a race like this. Once they're in a seat, it takes a lot to get them out. So I don't know, he may win again. I don't know if it'll be a terrible thing if he gets in again, but there are a couple other people that I wanted to talk about. So enough with Rick Scott. I'll do a little bit of comparison. So one of the gentlemen that is running against Rick Scott, his name is John Columbus. And I did some research about him. So he is from Florida, the Orlando area. His dad was a 38-year Disney executive, retired. His mom was a business owner. His brother's a business owner. John himself is in his 40s. He's 41 years old. And he works for Disney and SeaWorld. He's in type things in the arts, very artistic, all the things. So there were a couple interviews that I listened to and I wanted to dive deeper into about him. And one of the things that he said about running against Rick Scott, it really wasn't a whole lot that he had to say. I think he's just not very, he doesn't have a lot of understanding about politics, a lot of knowledge yet. So he's very, I don't want to say immature in the wrong way, but very young in politics, so he doesn't know a lot. So one of the things he said about Rick Scott, why he's running against him, is because he feels that he is getting older. He's been in politics too long. He needs to come back to Florida and retire. He needs to let millennials run the show now because they are pretty much the majority and they are not being represented, and he feels like he would represent millennials more. So there are a few things about Mr. John Columbus that were a little bit worrisome and red flags for me. One of them is that he still lives at home. Now, I'm not going to bash anybody. I don't know his circumstances or his finances, but for me, if someone is 41 years old, a man, and still living at home with your parents, at first when I was listening to this, someone else was interviewing and reading his bio, and the lady said, yes, he still lives at home, da 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 da. So I was like, interesting. But then I looked at another interview when he was talking about different things. He says, so I still live at home, I'm a millennial, I'm a heterosexual male, this and this and that. So I was like, okay, so this guy is still living at home and wants to run for Senate, which the United States, if you think about it, in essence, is a very big business. And if you're working in politics, you're having to manage a budget from the American people. So I was just having a difficult time with that. Grown man in his 40s, still living at home with his parents, doesn't have his own place, working at Disney, no shade or anything bad. It was just all the things going through my head that he doesn't have enough experience, business experience or anything like that, to know how to run such a big business as the American government or anything in the Senate. So not that, you need a ton of experience, because sometimes those people are the best people, but it's better if they have some sort of fiscal background. The whole staying at home and living at home just kind of was a turnoff for me personally for those reasons. There were a couple other things that was asked of him, like for instance, the pro-life issue. The interviewer was asking him, how is he on the subject of pro-life and abortion? He says, well, I'm not here to say what my beliefs are. I'm going to take a poll from the Floridians and see what they want to do, and then I'm going to go by that. And I like the comeback of the interviewer. She said, well, your opinion really does matter, because that persuades people whether to vote for you or not. That makes a big impact whether they want to vote for you. So he was kind of wishy-washy with answering it. He says he's a Christian, he believes in God. And then there was a story that he brought up that he says, well, I was dealing with a person, she ended up expecting, she said she needed $400 for an abortion. He says, well, don't get an abortion, keep the baby. Comes out that she was just trying to swindle money from him. So that was a bit unique. He shared that story. I think he should have left that out. I'm just sharing that because that was his story about him being pro-life, that he got someone expecting and she wanted to get rid of the baby and he said no. So that's that. He calls himself a progressive conservative. That was also a red flag for me, a progressive conservative. It kind of reminds me of Bernie Sanders when he says he's a democratic socialist. And basically he means he's a socialist. So in this case, to me, this gentleman sounded like he was more of a progressive with a little bit of conservative values, maybe. So that's what I got from it. He proceeded to go on and say, well, I am an advocate for the alphabet community, the LGBT, on and on and on, alphabet community. So he is pro that. When he said he worked for Disney, that was another red flag for me. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but I mean, Disney for the last few years has not been the best to Christians or good social values, especially when it comes to children. So when he said he is a big advocate for the alphabet community, that was a big no for me. So there's couple other things. He is a big cannabis user. He is pro, I think it's the Third Amendment. I'm going to be talking about that too. He is very much pro that. I am not. Lots of people have different views on that. We'll talk about that later. So there's a couple things about him. During the interview, his cat came walking through the interview. So it kind of was pretty funny. And it kind of reminded me of what J.D. Vance said about these single women with cats, except he's a single male with a cat. So anyway, it was just really funny. So that's John Columbus. I'm not telling you how to vote. Make your own mind up. I'm just giving you my viewpoints and things that he said and things that I've gleaned from the interview. There really wasn't a lot about him out there. There were a couple interviews. In each interview, this is what I got from him. In my personal opinion, he's a big no. So we're going to roll on to the next candidate that's running against Senator Rick Scott, and that is Keith Gross. He is a Florida native as well. In the Panhandle, he grew up with a single mother and a sister. His mother worked really hard, wanted to be a teacher, worked really hard to do that. She was a park ranger with 2 single children, wanted to be a teacher. She worked hard to become a teacher, which is really very special. My mom's a teacher, so I like the idea that this lady worked really hard to get to her dream. He himself did the same thing. He worked hard, put himself through school. There was a little break in between. When he was 24, he ran for a seat in Atlanta as a Democrat. He was briefly a Democrat. I'm not going to hold that against him. People change. Ronald Reagan was a Democrat at one time. I know that's the Republicans' idol. So people can change. And he was much, much younger. He is now in his 40s as well, as like the other gentleman. I liked him a whole lot more. There are a few things that I'm going to talk about. He's very strong on the border, very strong. Multiple interviews that I've looked at, very strong. He was mentioning about how Rick Scott was very wishy-washy with that and sided with Obama with the DACA. So that was one of the things that he had mentioned. And also Rick Scott signed in-state tuition for illegals. So that was one of the things that he was against that Rick Scott did. Keith Gross is very much pro-America, keeping the borders closed and protecting the border. So I really liked that. Very fiscally conservative, very, very much. He started businesses, sold businesses. That's one of the things that I liked about him, is because he has some fiscal background, business background, knows about finances, knows about a business. Like I've mentioned before, the United States is a big business. The government takes our money that we worked really hard for, and they use it, and they haven't been very smart about it. So I like the things that he had mentioned, especially with Social Security, very much pro, because people pay in that. They need to receive what they pay in, much more, and how the government has just been really not nice to senior citizens when it comes to that. So I like that point about him. Very much keeping children protected from the indoctrination. I really like that. I mentioned the fiscal conservative part. Very, very much strong on the board. I mentioned that. Raised his own money for things. One of the things that he did mention that I liked was he was very much against Rick Scott signing the bill to send more money over to Ukraine. I think that won me over more than anything, is that he's very much against sending money to these foreign wars, specifically the most recent, which is, or before the whole Israel one, is Ukraine. So he was very much against that. So for me, I think he's a good candidate if you didn't want to vote for Rick Scott. These are just my opinions. I'm not telling you how to vote. I wanted to give you some information, dig through these candidates' bio, all the things about them. So hopefully this was helpful especially for Floridians. Like I said, be sure to share this video with others, especially if you're voting on August 20th and everything. So I'll be back with another video to talk about more things in the ballot. Thank you so much for joining. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and see you in the next video.